You don't submit to a boyfriend, sis. Any man who is not a God-led man should never even be talking about submission because you aren't submitting to God.
And if any man talks about you need to submit, even if y'all are dating, if he's talking about submission in the sense of like you need to do, that's a red flag. That's something that I would look at. That's something that I'm like, nah, that's not. We aren't there at that level yet.
Because if they can't submit to God who is perfect, marriage is gonna be real hard.
Ammani Woram, that has a podcast called Ammani Talks, she recently went on one of her videos talking about to you sisters that, hey, if the man is talking about submission beforehand, you might want to watch out. In this video, my wife and I are going to react to her video where she talks to you sisters about looking out for fellas that are using the word submission just a little too harshly and a little too early within a relationship. All right, stay tuned for this video.
You don't submit to a boyfriend, sis. Any man who is not a God-led man should never even be talking about submission because you aren't submitting to God. Submission is not the cause of your relationship. Submission is the effect. A man is leading you under godly authority, and so you submit. You don't submit to get the man. It's not like, oh, I submit, and because I'm submissive, I will get a husband. No. You should never be submissive to no man that did not marry you. I don't care if that's your baby daddy. He didn't marry you. You don't submit to your boyfriend. He didn't marry you. I don't care how long y'all been living together. You don't do what that man says. You do what God says and what your dad say.
We all know the S word. I feel like it's always drug under the rug. In general, just the word submission and things of that nature. But biblically, she's not wrong. Because when it talks about submitting and wives submit to your husband and then you to one another, like as she's saying, it's not saying boyfriend or baby daddy or whatever else you want to call them. You are to submit to your husband. And I think that then a part of me was like, okay, at the same time, I say this. It's not that as a single woman, like she said, even as a single woman, you're submitted to who? God and, your earthly father or whomsoever has that role in your life. And so I think that because some men may say, okay, well, how would I know that she's submissive? Look at how she's submitting to God and other authority figures in her life. That fruit will still be seen and evident in a biblical way.
Yeah.
But she has no biblical reason to be submitting to you before I do.
Yeah. She's not obligated to submit to you. If anything, before you're married, this is just you looking for fruit. And you looking for evidence to say, oh, okay, I see that she's submissive by how she submits to others.
Yep.
Like you can't expect to give demands that you can't fulfill or that you're not obligated to fulfill if you aren't her husband.
Yeah.
Like, I see guys do it all the time. They'll start making these list of demands of which they want. At the time, it could just be a person that they're dating or talking to, but they make these lists of demands of things that they want. And I mean, okay, cool, make a list of things that you want.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're expecting that person that they're dating to start fulfilling them. And it's like, whoa, slow down. I mean, you putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way that you can have a lasting marriage if you're already starting off with demands up front. And if you don't meet these demands, then it's not going to work out. I think that we get so just caught up in what we think marriage is, but instead of what it actually is. And this is the problem of what we see within the world today. And it's the reason why, divorce rates are where that they are now, is because we've gotten away from what the word says.
Yeah.
Even when you look at when it talks about I was just looking at Ephesians 5.
Yeah.
We always like to jump to verse 22 where it says, "Wives, submit to your husbands, and as you submit to the Lord." But go back a verse before that, it says submitting to one another in the fear of Christ. But it's like you don't get to that point right off the bat. You don't just see a girl, I'm interested in that girl, I want to pursue that girl. All right, you submit to me. It's like, nah, you don't just jump to that. You got to first look at, okay, how is that person? How are you submitting to Christ for the men?
That part.
How are you submitting to Christ? Because if you're not submitted to Christ,
It's gonna be
then
real hard.
then no one is going to submit to you. You know, you how are you going to expect the girl that you want to have your as your future wife? How you expect her to submit to you if you're not even showing signs of submission? Like good leaders are leaders that lead up front. Good leaders are leaders that lead with their boots on the ground. You know, good leaders are the leaders that lead through submission. You know, they show you instead of just telling you. It's a lot of guys out here that want marriage. They want to have a fulfilling life, but they're trying to get it by means of just force. And God doesn't force us. He doesn't force us into relationship with Him. Why are we trying to force that onto women when it's like, okay, you should be looking for these things? So, you have anything?
I was literally in deep thought. I think that when it comes to, as you were saying, it's like, okay, submitting one to another, right?
Mhm.
Ultimately submitting unto God. I think that one thing that stood out to me, I don't know when it was first said, but it stuck with me. It's like it's important that we do inspect regardless if it's you're looking at a man or a woman,
Mhm.
it's best that you inspect their ability to submit to God, because if they can't submit to God who is perfect, marriage is gonna be real hard.
Yeah.
Because either way, there's submission on both parts.
Yeah.
You know, I even because as the word says, submit one to another. So there's submission on both parts. So if you don't see it in its perfect sense, like you can't submit to a perfect God, it's going to be very hard to submit to an imperfect man
This is
or woman.
sorry. This is and that's a good point. This is something that one of the commentaries said about the word submitting. It says the word submitting here literally means to be under in rank. It is a military word. It speaks of the way that an army is organized among levels of rank. You have generals and colonels and majors and captains and sergeants and privates. There are levels of rank, and you are obligated to respect those in higher rank. Now, what we, as we were talking about in fruit inspecting, and like, okay, how do you, when you're observing that person, especially, men observing uh the women that they're dating or interested in for marriage, okay, how does she admit to the captain, to the king, to the general of the, and then from there, okay, how does she submit to the others that are God appointed in her life and rank under her? So how does she submit to a pastor? How does she admit? How does she submit to her boss at work? How does she submit to father and or father figure? Um, how does she submit to just those that have influence in her life, that have, that are molding her in, and God placed them in her life to help build her up as a woman of God? Like, how is she, look at how she's even interacting in her submission amongst her friendships. Is she always the one that's kind of domineering amongst her friends? These are things that you can look for and say, okay, all right, I see these things, even when y'all are dating, because if she's not submitting to, the pastor and what he's saying as far as giving her the word, and how's she going to expect to submit to you when, scripture says later on in that verse where it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, to make her whole, to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by the word. How can you wash her if she's not used to taking baths? So how does she submit to a pastor? How does she admit? How does she submit to her boss at work? How does she submit to father and or father figure? Um, how does she submit to just those that have influence in her life, that have, that are molding her and God placed them in her life to help build her up as a woman of God. Like, how is she? Look at how she's even interacting in her submission amongst her friendships. Is she always the one that's kind of domineering amongst her friends? These are things that you can look for and say, okay, all right, I see these things. Even when y'all are dating, because if she's not submitting to the pastor and what he's saying as far as giving her the word, and how's she going to expect to submit to you when scripture says later on in that verse where it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her to make her whole, to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by the word. How can you wash her if she's not used to taking baths? If she's not used to being washed by her church, by her pastoral leaders, by her the ministers that are in her life, the elders. If she's not used to doing that, there's no way that she's going to do it with you when you begin to
it's
lead
not
her.
a light switch.
No.
Sometimes we think that it's like, oh, once we're married, no, you need to already be seeing the fruit. Like, you can't wait until I do and expect things to just turn on and just change. We have to already, y'all know how I always say, you're a wife before you're a wife. You are a husband before you're a husband. You're already walking in that and doing things that exude that before you even step into that ministry, because marriage is ministry. So before you even step into it, you're already behaving as such.
So ladies, if he isn't, in the same for the ladies, if he isn't submitting himself to the Lord, if he isn't submitting himself to the King, I mean, that should be a clear sign for you to run anyway. And if any man talks about you need to submit, even if y'all are dating, if he's talking about submission in the sense of like you need to do, that's a red flag. That's something that I would look at. That's something that I'm like, nah, that's not. We aren't there at that level yet. We aren't there at that level. And by you even entertaining that's opening up a whole nother can of worms that it sounds like there's a door open for control.
And speaking of red flags, y'all check out this video that we have posted right here where we interview pastors from our church who have had tons and tons and tons of experience when it comes to red flags, because they have done so much marriage counseling for so many different couples, so many different dynamics. Y'all check out this video.
You know what love is.